All right. Hello, everybody. I see everyone's piling into the webinar. Thanks so much for being here today. We're going to wait just another quick minute for people to join us. I know everybody's bouncing between meetings, but while we're waiting, I do have an icebreaker question for us. Today is National Coconut Cream Pie Day, of all things. So if you could hit the chat, tell me where you're calling in from and what's your favorite pie flavor. Ooh, pie flavor. Doesn't have to be coconut cream pie, even though we're going to spoil their day. Yep, there I see some cherry. A lot of cherry lovers love that too.
So many pies that I would not try.
Really? Key
That
lime?
they're
How
not
about
for
that one?
me. No, so many that are not for me.
Peanut butter pie. That's a new one. I like that. I saw
I'm
pumpkin too, but sometimes I say pumpkin because, I am from Missouri. Peach. Gotta love peach. Sweet potato pie. There you go. Look at this is why I love our audience. Like things you wouldn't have expected to see. Fruits of the forest. Oh, guess who's Googling that after the show? That would be me. Lemon meringue. Dig it, dig it. A lot of apples and cherries. Yeah, we didn't run the poll this way, but we could also do like we have scientists on staff. They could do like a histogram and try to figure out the most popular pies. Whoa, hold on. We got Honolulu chocolate. I can't even say it. Hopia pie. I probably said that wrong. Very cool. Key lime, Florida girl. Thank you, Stephanie. Dig it, dig it. Blueberry. I like blueberry pie too. We're going to give just one more quick minute. Don't worry. We're not going to talk about pie all day. I promise. Macadamia. Look at this is an amazing list. I'm definitely saving this chat. I'm definitely going to my recipe box and you're expanding my horizons. Thank you for doing that. All right, I got 202. So we're going to go ahead and get started. You can keep those coming if you're just joining. Just let us know where you're calling in from and what your favorite pie flavor is here on National Coconut Cream Pie Day. That's great. Welcome to Perspectives. We're going to be talking about one for the ages, multi-generational factors within the world of work. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to our panel. My name is Matt Pepsel, the godfather of talent optimization. But let's get the attention over to our panelists where it belongs. I'd like to begin with Brian Phillips. Brian is a global executive recruiter at HP. He's an Oklahoma native who moved to California with the goal of building leaders and cultivating change around the world after graduating from the University of Oklahoma. As an executive recruiter with HP, he strives to enable the development of better technology for everyone, everywhere, highlighting the intersection of his career interests and passions. Brian, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hey, happy to be here. Thank you.
Next up, we have Courtney Swift. Courtney is the Corporate Communications Manager at the Predictive Index. She is a strategic marketing and communications leader with a mix of experience across the sports, IT security, and HR tech spaces. She successfully leverages a variety of functions to communicate and drive engagement, adoption, and change management results. Courtney, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone.
And last but certainly not least, we have David Blake. Dr. Blake is the Executive Leadership Coach at Building Forward Now. He is a recognized expert in developing and implementing large-scale organizational transformation initiatives and coaching leaders and teams through change to achieve remarkable results. He brings decades of strategy, change management, and process improvement experience to increase productivity and improve efficiencies in complex environments. David, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to be here.
All right. So I'm going to begin us with just a little bit of housekeeping because we get the questions all the time. Yes, the webinar is being recorded and will be emailed to you at the end of the show. You're welcome to share it with your colleagues or review it for yourself. We are going to be having an audience Q&A session at the end. So if you have a question for our panel, then you're going to want to use the Q&A button inside the Zoom because that way we'll be sure to see your question. If you put it in the chat, we might see it. If you put it in the Zoom, we will see it. And you're going to want to stick around to the end because we're going to have some bonus resources. You can learn how to get in touch with the panelists, and we'll also give you a preview of next month's webinar. There you go. Next up, we have our Menti poll. So as always, you can look inside the chat. You're going to see a link for the poll as well. Or if you have your magic phone, you can point at that QR code on the screen and get right over to our Menti poll where we have two questions for you today. We always love to learn about our audience and where you're coming from. And so the very first question here is, which generational cohort best describes you? We have Generation Z, Millennial, Gen X, Baby Boomers, and the Silent Generation. So we'll watch as these numbers come in from our panelists. There we go. Yep. I almost included Generation Alpha, but I declined to do so. Would have given us a little bit more balance, perhaps, in terms of nobody from the Silent Generation and no Gen Alpha, I wouldn't think. They should all be in school. All right, so there you go. So it looks like we're heavily concentrated as the workforce generally is, right, with Millennial and Gen X. I'm surprised personally to see the Gen Z is a little bit lower than I might have expected.
Mhm.
Interesting. 3 of Brian's friends decided to join today. That's good to see.
And I appreciate you three out there.
There you go. Yeah, but this is fantastic. I love it. I see Gen Z in the chat too. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So yeah, if you're still voting, go ahead and vote. That'd be great. But we're going to go on to the next one. Ooh, which of these generational issues have you personally experienced or witnessed? You can choose all that apply. In this case, you can see that our choices are communication challenges, a differing work ethic, the pace of learning and change, distrust or disrespect, or ageism. Yeah, all the above. I'm seeing a lot of alls inside of the chat as well. And it's unfortunate, but we are seeing quite a bit of representation. What do you think, panelists? Any surprises here? Sadly, no.
No, I think just the one thing I catch is the ageism issue. And I think sometimes people think ageism is limited to people on the older end of the spectrum, when in reality, I think any generation uh, could have the impact of ageism, either too young versus too old. So a little surprise there.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to get into that a little bit today. All right, so let's thanks so much for your votes. That really helps us understand where you're coming from as an audience. We'll get back to the presentation, and I'll put it this way. A lot of times we like to put up the talent optimization framework. I won't go into it with any detail, but in order to pass from business strategy to business results, we got to go through the people part, which means we have to design winning teams, hire top talent, inspire people to greatness, and diagnose people problems that are affecting the business. Now, Rachel, give us one click to show that multi-generational influences touch all of these people practices. From the nature of hiring, are we seeing any sort of, are we having fairness, or are we seeing discrimination, for example, in our hiring practices? Or the inspire relationship, have you ever had to manage a direct report who is older than you? Like, that's an interesting diagram, sort of a tendency. Or designing winning teams, when we have multiple different generations on a given team, are we accommodating and understanding how that shows up in our work? And diagnose, when we think about employee engagement surveys, are we cutting the results to understand if we're seeing any generational influences and how people are having different experiences at work? These are just some quick examples where talent optimization tells us we need to care about these things and this overlap of multi-generational influences. Okay, so next we've got a couple of quick headlines here just to kind of set the table for us before we jump into our panel discussion. You can see from HR Dive, 31% of hiring managers say they steer clear of Gen Z. Oh my, right? So this is the kind of thing that you see and you're like, oh, this is really, we could be doing better here. What about older workers finding a less tolerant workplace and say age discrimination abounds? And even Fast Company, the way we communicate, the Slack generation can't communicate with the email generation. Why more platforms are dividing the workplace? It seems like there's a new platform all the time. Like, you know, how many different platforms do we use to communicate with one another, and are they actually getting in the way of effective communication in some cases? So clearly there are gobs and gobs of headlines. I chose these 3 because I think they kind of tee us up nicely to say that there are absolutely multi-generational forces that really show up in our day-to-day work. So we'll go ahead and turn over to the panel discussion. And I want to begin with just a general overview. I want to give a little bit of an audience orientation. So I might ask each of our panelists if you can just share which generational cohort, how do you think about yourself when it comes to this topic, when it comes up? And for whichever one that you relate to the most, what are some of the associated values or characteristics of your cohort? And Courtney, maybe I can get you to get us teed up today.
Sure. So I'm a millennial. I kind of consider myself to be a mid-millennial, which I feel like is an important distinction, because there are definitely characteristics about millennials that are super positive. I would say, like, we're creative, we're tech savvy, kind of growing up both with and without the internet and, you know, like instant messenger, things like that. I think we're pretty empathetic, value driven in a sense, maybe not quite as much as Gen Z and some of those characteristics, but and we're less afraid, I would say, of like continuous feedback. I think some of the negative things, kind of around that instant gratification, or, you know, everyone gets a trophy. Those are some of the negative things that I'm not sure they're entirely wrong all the time, but that is why I say I'm kind of a mid-millennial, because I feel less towards that instant gratification, I suppose.
Gotcha. How about you, Brian? You want to go next?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Brian here. I consider myself more Gen Z. And for those of you who don't know, generally you can kind of classify it as like those between 1997 to 2012, born somewhere in that range. Um, when we talk about the generation, we have this entrepreneurial spirit. We care a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're very big into environmental issues, social issues, and then we also care a lot about work-life balance. We want to really work hard, but we also want to enjoy the finer things in life. Step away from work every now and then. I think we're a very opinionated crew, and when you come into the workplace, how do you navigate that as a generation, I think is something that we're learning and growing and developing in. But overall, I think we're a really passionate group, and some good things ahead.
I dig it. I dig it. David, how about yourself?
Well, first of all, glad to represent the senior citizens on the call today. So I am, as you might have guessed, if nothing else, by looking at me, I'm a baby boomer. And the baby boomers are an interesting lot. Today, just a quick statistic, 65% of the people that are in the Senate today are baby boomers. So largely the power structure has rested with the baby boomers. But to the question my other two colleagues mentioned, what largely impacts who I am today? And if I look at my world, I was born in 57. In 1957, it was not illegal to discriminate against pregnancy, against disability, against veteran status, against minority status. It wasn't until 1964 that those things changed. You might think landing on the moon is no big deal. I got to watch it live in the early 1960s, I think 64. So I think we're largely impacted by radical changes, not only in technology, but the way our society has made. And I think to some degree, some of us have embraced that as change agents. I don't think all of us in my cohort necessarily have embraced it, but I think many of us have. But I think largely the impact of technology today, I think we are the downsized generation. So we are leaving the workforce, and we're leaving them in large numbers, probably larger than we've ever seen. And I think the question that a lot of us in my cohort ask is, what's next?
That's right.
We were the generation of work, 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 work. If you weren't working, there was something wrong with you. And I give a lot of kudos to my colleagues, younger colleagues, who say that is not a sustainable model. And my ears have told me I agree. Thanks, Matt.
And for those keeping score at home, I am a Gen X, and I would say that our generation was very much about independence, autonomy. We definitely wanted to have that same enterprising spirit. The goal was to do better than your parents did, if you will. It wasn't competitive in that way. It was just saying, like, there's a quality of life to be earned here. And so we really looked at work and enterprise as the means to do that, and hard work in particular. Some of the more defining events that happened, for Gen Z Gen X, that shaped us, things like we grew up in the Cold War and watching the Berlin Wall fall, and all these things. And so, we won't talk about too much today, but these societal events that take place, and they always shape a generation. There's always these also reactions when a new generation enters to try to establish some amount of independence from the generation that was just there. So a lot of times the two generations that are really near each other, when they bump into each other, they don't always get along quite so well. And there's always fun stuff. But I think we'll continue our conversation here talking about multi-generational work by asking this question: what are some of the benefits? Right. And Dave, maybe I'll ask you to get us started here, but we clearly have in many organizations generational workforces. What are some of the positive sides of that?
Oh, I can go on, probably a whole separate podcast for this. I think we do tend to focus on the negative more. I think one of the strongest positives is were areas that I might have blind spots in because of sort of the uniqueness of, for example, the work till you drop methodology. Just keep going, go for the next, gold ring, the next promotion, the next circle. I really admire the fact that colleagues that I've worked with as I entered into semi-retirement had a whole different perspective. And, when I took time to really embrace and understand where they were coming from and why they looked at it that way, I think it opens up the door to a far more diverse workplace. It'd be nice if everybody thought just like me, right? No, wrong. It's nice when everybody has a different perspective. And I think when you sort of let go of your beliefs and let other people share theirs, doesn't mean you have to agree, you come up with a much more diverse, and I'll be honest with you, interesting workforce where different opinions are valued and appreciated.
I feel the same way. Court, you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Just on the overall perspective, kind of being a benefit from a multi-generational workforce, I think it gives your business an opportunity to just have like be that much more relatable when you have different folks from all these different generations working together. And like when you're outputting whatever your product is, I think that can only be a benefit to you. But yeah, I appreciate the differing opinions too. As hard as it can be sometimes, I think ultimately it's always a better thing to have the different perspective and the opinions so you can kind of bounce things off each other and ultimately grow from that.
Well said. Brian, what do you think? Benefits. We're still on the positives right now.
We're still in the positives. Hey, I like the positives. To kind of piggyback on what they were talking about too, when Gen Z is entering into the workforce, we have to really rely on the folks who've been there for a little bit longer than us to understand how a business works, to understand the greater context. And so that's a critical, benefit to multi-generational workplace. When we're going through a new challenge or change, it's like Gen Z hasn't experienced something like this before. And so we need to know, hey, what did you try in the past that worked and what didn't work? Here are some of our fresh perspectives that maybe we can include to make it even better. But without knowing what's happened before us and leaning on those leaders, it would take us a lot longer to be successful. So I think that's a huge benefit.
I like it when there's that sort of combination. I know if I was working with a young project manager one time and we needed some templates, and I said, well, let me just, whip something together for us. And she said, how did you do that? And I said, well, I've been doing this for 20 years. You have experience. It's easy. But at the same time, I had another person who I had hired and said, I went through your whole application process on my phone and it was a terrible experience. And I thought, I never even thought of doing that. I don't use my phone that way. So it's like, it's really great. You get perspectives in both ways. Sometimes you can offer it and sometimes you're on the receiving end of it. And it's really interesting in that regard. But I think we saw from the Menti results that not everyone's having a great multi-generational experience, whether we've experienced it ourselves, some of the challenges, or when it comes to having witnessed it. Unfortunately, sometimes we see that as well. We weren't directly involved. But what are some of the common challenges? Courtney, I'll ask you to get us started. When you think about when it doesn't go right, like what kind of doesn't go right?
Yeah, I think we saw this a little bit in the Menti earlier, and I kind of thought it was funny, I guess, almost to me. But a couple of the things there that people seem to find to be the struggles were communication and the work ethic. And I think it really is just like a lack of communication that is leading to a misunderstanding about different generations' work ethics. Because I think a lot of times generations before millennials, so X or the boomers, in my experience, tend to think that millennials or Gen Z maybe don't have the same work ethic, that maybe we don't care as much, maybe we're lazier. I don't know what it is. But I just don't think that's true. And I think the lack of communication to kind of get to know each other and find like empathy within common experiences in general, then leads to some of that that you might see in the workplace, and just kind of assuming that somebody doesn't have as great of a work ethic as you. So I just thought it was interesting because I had this very, very specific opinion on this and saw it
I like
earlier.
that.
So, yeah.
Yeah, different work ethic doesn't necessarily mean a weaker work ethic. But go ahead, Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit more too? What are some of the common challenges that you've, you saw our Menti poll results and you have your own perspective on this. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. When I saw the poll right when we were starting this, I was like, oh my gosh, I knew there was a conversation to be had here, but I got excited because I was like, whoa, I honestly did not expect to see so many people put communication, work ethic as those two big players into challenges that they face in the workplace. For me, I know one of the first jobs I had, I went into a meeting with a senior vice president, and I'm younger, I'm Generation Z, and I took this very relaxed approach to think, hey, we're two people talking, like, what's up, how's it going? And I got feedback from that of, hey, like, we're talking to some pretty senior folks at the company. We need to button it up a little bit. And in my mind, I'm like, what? We're all just people. Like, yes, they have a higher title than me, but I thought we could be friends. And the truth is we can be friends, but there is kind of the balance between how Gen Z interacts with other folks. And I think it can work on both ends. Like, hey, a senior vice president, a younger person coming into the conversation, they can talk friendly and it can be a little more casual. But at the same time, they got a lot of business that they're working on, and their time is really important. And so I need to recognize those things too. So I see the concern, but I also think that our communication style, they're just different. Gen Z takes a more relaxed approach. We think, hey, we can keep this casual and still get business done. It doesn't have to be so formal. But I also think that, when it comes to work ethic, right? I think Gen Z wants to work hard. We're some of the most passionate, dedicated folks I've ever, worked with. I see people staying up really late, working on things that they're really passionate and care about. But maybe the way our work style presents itself is different than someone else. For example, maybe I want to end work a little early on a Wednesday to go to my run club with some friends, but I'm at the coffee shop on a Sunday working away on some of the projects. But maybe that's not translated or seen as well. And it just manifests itself differently across different generations.
And I think the simple examples are some of the most powerful ones in a way. And my only Gen Z claim to fame is that my bride and I made 3 of them. And when I look at my oldest daughter in particular, when she's got her phone, her thumbs move so fast when she's like, I'm like, how? Well, I didn't grow up at the same way. So if she's looking at those types of that's communication for her, and it's totally different. And we saw that in the headline where email generation, if she says, now that I'm going to college or now that I'm looking for a job, I have to write a professional email. I've never done that. And I'm like, how have you never done that? Right. It's like, well, we don't email. We don't do these things. So it's almost like the little things is that we lose all our perspective by the time we're many, many years along. And it will happen to millennials. It's starting to. It will happen to Gen Z eventually too. That the tide doesn't ever stop, right? So I appreciate you kind of all of you expanding on some of those challenges for sure. But I want to shepherd us into this next part here, where I'm going to call it Mythbusters, which if you're Gen Z, you may not really recognize that, but it was an old show called Mythbusters. And I'm going to make some statements, and I want you to weigh in on whether you agree or disagree. These are statements that are designed to be provocative. I'm not saying I agree with these or disagree with these. I'm just going to throw them right out there. And so the first one I'll give you is this one. Gen Z is different from other generations because they want to do work that's meaningful. So Courtney, how do you react to that? How do you weigh in? And what side are you on the fact that Gen Z wants to do meaningful work?
I think as a millennial, thinking about Gen Z like that, I think it's completely true that they want to do meaningful work. It's very clear to me that they do, and with the folks from Gen Z that I work with. I just don't think that it is only Gen Z that wants to do meaningful work. And I think other folks before Gen Z have done meaningful work and have shown passion that sometimes allows Gen Z, I think, to show that much more potentially.
Brian, you're the Gen Z rep. What do you think? Is it true, or how to what extent is it true?
I think it's definitely, there's a lot of truth to the statement. We are one of the most connected generations worldwide. We grew up with TikTok, Instagram, all this information right in front of our faces across, not only the country that you live in, you're getting information, but across the globe. And with this wealth of information at your fingertips, you start to become a lot more aware of some of the pressing issues that are going to impact you on a personal level, but also on a global level. And when you have this amount of information, it's hard to ignore it and to think, oh, like the work that I do on the day-to-day shouldn't relate to what I'm seeing fed into me every single day. So we want to have, our work have meaning, have purpose, and impact the broader world as a whole. And I think that's true for every generation, but I think it may be a little more to the forefront of Gen Z's mind because that's what we've grown up with seeing ever since the beginning. And maybe it's not the number one thought that comes to other people's minds, but I think it's important to everybody.
I think also when Gen X as an example, I'll use my example. It wasn't really so much that you needed to be in love with your work. You needed to work. Like you're going to have a job. And the fact is that outside of work is when you go have your meaning and do whatever you want. Sure, get that. And a lot of times people are very frustrated in their roles. And so as we raised Gen Z kids, we said, follow your bliss and, make sure you do things you love. Don't turn out like me. And then all of a sudden we didn't recognize and do the math fast enough that they'd end up coming to work for us. And we're like, oh my gosh, where did you come from? We made that. That's part of it. So I think that for me personally, what I saw is a massive shift post-pandemic, where a lot of people who would have taken jobs that were functional as opposed to providing meaning, all of a sudden said, is this really how I want to spend my life energy? Not necessarily anymore. And so every time I make a post on LinkedIn about Gen Z, a lot of times millennials and Gen X and boomers will come in and say, hey, we want these things too. And I'm like, okay, that's a very fair point. So
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you for that one. I'm going to start, Dave, I'm going to start you off with this one. Here's our next Mythbuster salacious statement. Now that they're established in mid-career, millennials have it easier than boomers did. What do you think?
No. And,
Just flat
and I
out
think,
no.
yeah, flat out no. That's, I think one of the mistakes that we always, we tell our kids. I used to walk, barefoot uphill and downhill both ways to school. We had it much worse. I think the challenges are different. And quite honestly, I think the challenges are greater. I think I had it easier to some degree. I didn't have technology strapped to my hip 24/7. We can, for the most part, we were the bulk of the workforce. There weren't, I've done research on this and showed that the generations now are coming faster and quicker, and the differences between the generations are faster and quicker because of the advent of technology. Where, baby boomers, we could have just sat and been in control and we'd be fat, dumb, and happy. But I think that was a misnomer. So today, I think the folks coming up are going to have it harder. And because work is life and life is work, life is far more complicated. If you look at, I live in a very high cost of living area, just trying to figure how you're going to make ends meet. Those things impact how people bring their full self to work. So I wish I could tell you that you're going to have a blast and it's going to be a cakewalk. It's doable. It's challenging. All those things are true. But I think when my generation says, "Oh, you don't remember what it was like," I had a dial-up telephone and a dictaphone machine. I mean, who cares? Those are great stories. But the reality is, I think the younger generations are going to have it tougher.
Yeah, it is hard. I mean, like you said, it's just different, right? So when you had help wanted ads in the newspaper, gave way to something like Indeed, and you're like, oh, you can
Right.
find jobs so much easier. You're like, yeah, so can everybody else. Like, guess what? It's just different. So,
Yeah.
Courtney, you're our millennial representative. What do you think? So, have you ever heard this before, and how do you land on it?
Well, I appreciate you, David, for acknowledging that it is potentially harder for us millennials. And there have been some like polarizing articles out there calling millennials the unluckiest generation. And I think sometimes that feels true. Whether or not it actually is, I'm sure it just depends on the millennial, but certainly like we've gone through, whether it's me or like a different age of millennial, like multiple recessions, like very tough job markets when millennials are coming out of college, potentially when you're in the middle of your career and, maybe you're able to make a greater salary or you're kind of in like a really solid growth period for your job, then you might have the pandemic just come and then everything changes. So, I appreciate that, David. Again, I don't know that it's easier necessarily, but I also am not going to make excuses about it. So
Nice.
yeah.
Well, I'm going to give you this one, Brian. When I'll put this one out to you. Gen X workers care more about earning a paycheck than having a life outside of work.
I think Gen X cares about having a paycheck, but I also think that everyone cares about having a good paycheck, right? We all got to pay the bills. It's kind of harder to get a house nowadays than ever before. So, millennials, Gen X maybe are still renting. We care about a paycheck. But I think at the root of it, Gen Z and millennials and everyone really wants a good work-life balance, and how that manifests itself is just different. But I think Gen Z cares a lot about it now more than maybe previous generations because we can. I think, we have the ability to work remotely. That's integrated into all of our lives. When I was in college, the pandemic happened. I had to transition to working remotely. I learned how to do it very efficiently. And I think a lot of Gen Z sits there and they're required to go back into the office and get there at 7 a.m. and stay till 6 p.m. or whatever the working hours are. It's kind of like, why? I can be just as productive at home, and I can reduce my carbon footprint. I can go on vacation and still work a full workday, but then afterwards go sit on the beach for a little bit. And so I think, for Gen Z, it's a little bit more of, hey, why are we doing this? And maybe if you can better communicate the value of why, we need a more rigid environment, we can adjust. But I think we all care about work-life balance, and Gen Z just particularly thinks that it can work.
I
pretty
love that.
well. Yeah.
When my son was in university, he was down in Rhode Island and he would be in the parking lot on Zoom in his classes so he could just close his laptop and get surfing. And I'm sitting here thinking,
Right.
the Gen X in me was like, wait a second, that's not how you do it. And I was like, hey, good for you, man. Like, if you can make that work, that's great. So, Gordon, I think you also had something you wanted to share on this one too. What do you think?
Yeah, I saw something in the chat too, just around, I think Adriana, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, but that Gen X wants a life outside of work too. And I do think that's true. Both of my parents are like the very, very beginning of Gen X. And so it's just been really interesting for me to watch them and kind of like their work experience and their work-life balance. And I agree with that statement and that like they want that. But I think like it must have just been like so ingrained in them that like the paycheck is potentially more important, or like I need to forgo like what I actually want to do or this vacation because I need to work because that's what I was kind of taught. So it's just something that I sort of notice with my parents and trying to navigate. Like I have a very different work like opportunity than they have had. In that like my dad is kind of an essential worker of sorts. So yeah, it's just interesting to kind of watch them navigate that. But I agree with the statement that they do want more than just a paycheck. I think it's just
I love that term,
yeah.
navigate. And
Hey,
Dave, I'm
Matt,
gonna ask, yeah,
just
please.
one quick comment, because I saw it and I think this is a really valid point and one that we haven't quite figured out what to do as an alternative. There are some jobs you just simply can't work from home, right? If you turn a wrench for a living, unless you can virtually figure out how to do that, it's not going to happen. And I think that creates a lot of animosity. You get to have some people, it's the have-ins, the have-nots.
Mm.
And so I think we're still struggling with that. I think that doesn't mean I don't agree that we need to have the flexibility, but it's going to look different for different people based on the structure and needs of the job.
I like that a lot. And Dave, I'm gonna keep you on the hot seat here for this next Mythbuster special, which is that only boomers experience ageism in the workplace. We kind of got into that a little bit earlier, but can you expand on that thought for me?
Yeah, I think, to me, ageism, as I got older in my career, I started to ask myself whether or not I was still valuable in it. I was, and I made a strong effort to say academically, I mean, I did everything I can to be as on top of my game as possible, because I was always worried people would view me as that old guy just isn't getting it anymore. And that's something you have to do individually, right? So you create value yourself. Age is not indicative of value. But I think on the other hand, what I would hear sometimes is in the reverse. How could somebody that looks as young and fresh as Brian offer anything of value? He hasn't been around long enough. He hasn't done his time. He hasn't suffered the war wounds that all of us have. And I would argue that's probably a good reason why we should value him, because he hasn't been jaundiced to the opinions of others. And so, yeah, I do think it works both ways. And I think you battle it by creating value in yourself, right? And so my value was, yes, I can't hide the fact that I have gray hair and my age is what it is, but I also have a lot of wisdom that you probably don't have. And I try to make sure I can share that in a way that's helpful. On the other hand, Brian has the ability to say, you know what, have we ever thought about this before? Because a lot of us haven't maybe thought about that before.
Well, let's talk about that, Brian. You're on the receiving end sometimes. Like, what does ageism look like when an early career person, Gen Z person experiences it?
Yeah, this is a really great question. So, I'm going to bring in two quick examples that I've just experienced throughout my career. One would be, I remember I got into a meeting once and the person thought that the meeting room was wrong. They were like, "Oh, like I thought like you must be like for school or something. Like I don't know how these mix-up happens."
How did this intern get in my meeting room?
Oh no.
Yeah, and I was like, "Oh no, like I'm here to talk about X, Y, and Z." And it kind of set it up to where my credibility was already lost before I even started. Because it's like, how can I provide some valuable insight when you're already looking at me like a kid and you're in a much more senior level? And then another example would just be, it's like, oh, and don't get me wrong, I love to plan culture events. I'm kind of the culture guy, like, oh, like let's bring the company together, let's all have a good time. But it can easily be misconstrued if like we're having strategic conversations and then it's okay, we're going to talk about the strategy and Brian, you you make sure that we got some good icebreakers and we got a good game to kick off the meeting. Because in my mind, I'm like, well, I love to do that, but I also want to bring the strategic insights, right? So I think it goes both ways. And I really think just communication and calling things out at those times, because there is stereotypes like that may impact David that I would never probably face, such as, maybe the older generation is seen as less able to, adapt to change, but we really need to make change. So they may leave David out of that conversation, but then invite Brian because he's really tech savvy and loves AI to the conversation, when really it needs to be both of us, because the workforce has lots of different generations and we all have to work together. So
very true. I would say that my own personal experience is that I would experience effects of ageism when I was very early in my career, and then I didn't. And now I'm starting to again. And that's because ageism itself is kind of curvilinear, if you will, in the sense that, when we saw in the Menti poll, for example, so many people on the call today are in that millennial Gen X sort of cohort with fewer representatives on the other bookends, if you will. And that's how that happens. So it's every generation is going to experience it either when they're first starting out, or more likely sort of as they continue to be, beyond, and there's been a replenishment, if you will, of some of the younger people. But I'll do one more for us. And Corey, I'm going to ask you to start us off on this one. Gen Z and millennials are great at technology. That's why they want to work remotely all the time.
Totally. So I don't think that that's necessarily false. I think, we are pretty great at technology. I think we do prefer to work remotely, but I don't think it's because of the technology. I just think that it's because I don't know if it's not, we've had the opportunity, I guess, or we've sort of been forced into figuring out how to work remotely very early in our careers because of the pandemic. And I think for some millennials, at least, like, you're probably working from home before that. It seems like from the chat too, but I think it just has to do with like the freedom and flexibility, less of the technology. Us being good at technology certainly helps us kind of manage this. And be able to do things remotely. But I think it has more to do with like the concepts of work-life balance, the concepts of flexibility that maybe weren't talked about as much for previous working generations that now I think is almost required of millennials and Gen Z.
I like that a lot. I remember one time when my kids were little and the power went out and they said, well, I know the power's out, but how come the Wi-Fi is not working? I thought, you don't know technology at all. That's a different story. But Brian, how about that? Same thing? Any similarities or differences when it comes to tech savvy and the inclination to want to work remotely? Are those two things highly correlated?
I think so. I mean, growing up, the pandemic happened, right? I had to move my school, my learning, how I interacted with the world online for almost 2 years. We were largely blocked out, and we were also a very tech-centered generation. But at the same time, I love interacting with people. I'm a very social person. I get fueled by those interpersonal connections. And so I love an office moment myself. It's not always like I want to just be at home behind my computer. So I think that, yeah, I'm pretty on the side of remote work, but I also do enjoy, the interpersonal connections.
Nice. I like it. Well, I got an eye on the clock. I'm going to move us forward just a little bit. And Dave, I'm going to put you on the hot seat for this one. I'm going to shift us into part 3 for us, which is all about success tips. How are we going to talk about making sure that, at least doing our best to try to minimize the likelihood of the Menti poll results we saw of challenges that are happening. And my question for you, Dave, to get us started, what can HR leaders specifically do to create a multi-generational friendly culture?
That's a good question. I think to a lot, it's education. First of all, educating what the differences are, having open discussions. I mean, I'd love to see a dialogue like this. So my background has been manufacturing. It's also been higher education, right? And I'd love to see conversations at all different levels about exactly what we're talking about.
Right.
Because first of all, I go back to your statement. It's about busting the myth. And if we all are going to end up being in the room, whether we like it or not, because that's just the demographic of the world we live in, and my generation has to turn something over to somebody, then would it make more sense that we talk more openly and embrace those differences and find out how to include those differences? So I think as an HR leader, and I've had that opportunity in many places to do that, we took opportunities to do things like brown bag lunches. We're not going to teach anything. We're going to have a conversation. Get to know the person next. I get to know Brian. I get to know Courtney, and through relationships, we find out that we're not really that different after all.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bright spot.
I like that. And Brian, I know you're huge on education as well. What do you think that HR leaders can do to educate, people throughout the culture to make a friendly culture, right?
Yeah, I think, one of the big things is just helping us all realize that we, at the core of it, have the same goals in this world. I think we all want to make a positive impact on the world. And so when you're able to figure out what motivates a millennial, figure out what motivates, a Gen X person, figure out what motivates a Gen Z person, and really show that at the core of it, we're all aiming for the same thing, I feel like you can create a really strong work environment across generations, across various organizations, and really get us all moving in the right direction.
I like that. Making sure we stay focused on what really matters, not what doesn't. I dig that a lot. Court, I'm going to give you the last word on this one. I know you had a personal experience. You talked about your mom just a little bit ago, but I wonder if you might just tell us a little bit more about something that you personally witnessed and experienced.
Yeah, it's just interesting with my mom. Like, I think we need to just be a little more supportive sometimes of kind of like these older generations when they're growing out of their comfort zones, because as they kind of move along in the workforce, and I've noticed this with my mom, like she is sometimes uncomfortable suggesting change because she sort of grew up in a world where like things just were the way they were and they should stay that way. But just because somebody grows up in a generation that's like that doesn't mean that they don't want change and they don't want support when they see an opportunity. So it's just been interesting in my conversations that I've had with her. And I think, HR leaders or managers can have these conversations as well with the people they work with, just to support anyone really with the change that they kind of want to see. So
peace, love, and understanding. That's what Elvis Costello had it right all along. I can't believe it.
yes.
Or you may not remember, you and I've worked together for years now. And then we were in a meeting one time, you said, I remember when my mom turned 50. And I thought, I remember when I turned 52, about 2 years ago. It was kind of a wake up call for me to be, oh my gosh, that's right. We do have a multi-generational workforce here. But thank you so much, panel, for weighing in on that. I love it. We're going to go ahead and move over toward the audience Q&A portion of the show. So we're going to have the Q&A button that you see inside the Zoom. If you haven't had a chance to get your question together, now is a great chance to do that. And additionally, Rachel's going to throw a link into the chat for us. And this is a recognition that companies of all shapes and sizes are using talent optimization to improve their business results through better people practices. So if you're interested in learning more about Predictive Index and our talent optimization platform, that would be great, whether you're on the client side or whether you're a consultant, whether you have experience with it or not. Love to just make sure that you click through that link and tell us how we can help you. And I'm very excited to have Rachel bring up a slide for us. This is new for this month. And have you ever gotten to one of the end of these webinars and thought to yourself, like, I feel like we were just getting started. I feel that way today. And or a question about like, okay, this is a great conversation, but what is this going to mean where I work? So this month, I'm introducing this complimentary group coaching session available exclusively for people who are live on the webinar. So you can see that Rachel's popped up a Zoom. We're going to have a small group meeting. We're going to see how this works out. It's a total experiment on Wednesday, May 22nd at 1 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time. And I'd love for you to join us. So we've got the Zoom pull up. If you're interested, just go ahead and raise your hand for that. And I'd love to extend an invite to you and have you join, and we'll continue the conversation with me, and I'll provide you with some group coaching, and we'll get to some actions that you can take in your organization. Now, I don't know how many people are going to be interested, so space is a little bit limited. So we're going to find out. We want to keep the group small and intimate, if you will. So we'll take a look at the level of interest, and I'll be able to reach out to you if there's an opportunity to join us. And if you like this idea, we'll keep doing it. And if you hate it, well, it'll die a quiet death. Awesome. So thank you for that. So let's go to the audience Q&A portion of the show here. So the first question, and I'll direct this to the panelists wherever it makes sense. Do you think that some of the comments around the lack of work ethic may be confused with people having appropriate work boundaries? So maybe I think you don't work hard enough because I don't know what work boundaries are, for example. Who wants to be first to weigh in on that question?
Oh, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, please.
And this is, I'm as guilty as sin at this, and I've gotten so much better. I used to send an email on a Saturday, and somehow I'd expect people to respond to it, and then I wouldn't tell them that I expected it. I just expected it. It was where my mind went because it's what I did. And it used to frustrate me that my younger colleagues wouldn't respond to my email till Monday morning. And my wife told me one day, because I thought, it was, oh, you know, I got to wait till they answer. Why couldn't I just, it took 5 minutes to respond. And she said, well, you know, it is their weekend. And, you know, so I do think a lot of it, I've had to reprogram the way I think. And now I've actually, I wish I'd figured this out a long time ago. It's great not responding to emails on weekends. So you're right. I don't think it's a bad work ethic. It's determining what is really important to you at a given time. It doesn't mean you don't work hard. It doesn't mean you don't earn a check. But on your weekends, good on you. Don't answer those emails. The world, you are not dealing with nuclear weapons. You'll be fine.
Right.
And so you know, here to those of you that have taught me to back away and
like
make
that.
my life a little bit more fulfilled. So great question.
Another example of difference, right? So that's where our work boundaries are sort of not. I think a lot of times we ascribe an entire generation of saying this is their expectation about, you know, work ethic or work boundaries. But in reality, personality differences, nobody knows better than PI. Personality differences account for some of this too. And some of people just like it. Some people have different life situations. I know that now I actually do work a little bit on the weekends. I didn't when my kids were younger and home, but now they went off to college. I'm like, what else am I going to do? Like, come on. So things change in your life. But now I have learned, David, as you did, to set those to say, hey, at Monday at 9 a.m., schedule send. Don't send on the weekend, right? I like that feature a lot. How about this next one? What is one thing an organization can do to improve employee satisfaction at work across generations? How do we improve employee satisfaction across the generations? Brian, you got a thought?
Yeah, I have one thought, and it's a little more Gen Z centric, but I
Sure.
think it could apply across generations. Is for me, what motivates me is knowing exactly what my work is going to do and have us on a larger scale, right? So when I think about my company's ambitious goals towards, you know, the environment, environmental sustainability, how are we working to change the world and set an example on a broader scale? I'm a recruiter, but in my mind, I think about, oh, the person that I'm hiring into this position is going to make that impact. And so my little piece of work right there is impacting the environment through what I do on the day to day. And when I'm able to make that connection, and I think when companies can really make that connection for every employee and show them how the work that you're doing isn't just making our shareholders more money. It's bringing a global impact to set a precedent to make the world a better place for everybody everywhere. And I think that's a really inspiring message.
I like that a lot. Thank you for that. How about this one? How do you suggest helping Gen Zers with attendance issues? I've seen a serious pattern of Gen Z employees not showing up on time or not getting to meetings on time. Any thoughts on that one?
As someone who's Gen Z, I think I not to steal the floor, and I'll pass it back to David and Courtney in just a second. I think, you know, those moments are definitely performance-based issues. You know, I think when we're talking about that, Gen Z, we want to show up to work as a whole. And I think if someone is not showing up, then that's a performance issue that you need to have an honest conversation with them. I think if you're setting a meeting for 6 a.m. and, you know, you're thinking that they need to be there and they miss it, well, why does that meeting need to be at 6 a.m? Maybe the question, and maybe they can work with that. But if you're setting a meeting for 8, 9 in the morning and they're not showing up, then that's not a generational issue. I think that's a personal issue to address.
Definitely. Yeah.
I agree with that, Brian. I just one thing off of that too. And other meetings that I've been in with people that happen to be Gen Z, it's like not necessarily 6 a.m, but depending on who you work with and like where you work across the country, one meeting might be super convenient for 90% of the people that you work with. But if somebody is working in LA, the LA time zone, but you're in Boston, then your 9 a.m. meeting that's convenient for everyone is that 6 a.m. And I know that we kind of run into that a lot, at least at PI, because there are people all over the country at this point. So.
That's very true. And I love the idea here because it also said a pattern of Gen Z employees. If it's the same Gen Z employee, I like to give grace in the beginning because you don't know what's going on in people's personal lives, especially if you haven't earned the right to necessarily have that dialogue with them. But if you do see a pattern of habitual behavior, I think the first thing is You're right. It's a performance issue. At the same time, we have to recognize that employment is a partnership. So if Gen Z is coming and saying, hey, we want to see responses to the things that we tell you that we see as potential improvements here at work, and we're like, no, 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 and be on time, at some point, there's no give. It's all take. And that's not a partnership at that point either. So, but definitely, we expect people to show up on time. How about this next one? For those who seek purpose in work, do you consider maximizing company profitability to be consistent with or counter to purpose? Yeah, it's a good one.
I think you could have both. I mean, if a company's not profitable, it doesn't exist. But you don't want to sacrifice profitability for some degree of purpose. Why is it you exist? I tell people I coach all the time, have you asked yourself, why is it I'm here? What's my purpose? What am I doing? What's my impact? So I think my generation did focus a lot on profitability. Making more money and having a better life than my parents was the goal. I can tell you, it's not the goal of my children, even though they do fine and they have good lives. They're not saying, my goal is to get to the next step. Their goal is to find happiness and purpose and where they're at. So I think you can have both. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. But I think profitability without purpose is just a machine. And I think purpose without profitability means you don't have a company. And so you've got to find that happy medium. But I think they could be both true at the same time.
I think that the only advice I'd give here too, because I do a lot of work in this area, is that there's a difference between we act in a way that is trying to maximize profitability versus we come out and say it because we're authentic about it. And I would say that if you're truly saying to your employees and to your prospective candidates, our goal is to maximize profitability, don't expect to have access to top talent for the earliest generations because they're not all about that as a value system. They want to make enough, they want to be paid fairly, but if you're all about maximizing profitability and you truly put that out there, like good on you for being authentic, don't expect to be competitive for long. All right, how about this next one? I think we got time for one more here. How do you balance time spent in your place of work versus moving on just for a quick boost in salary or a higher role? I got to ask our recruiter this one. So basically saying time spent in your place of work, like when I was Gen X, it was like, you don't job hop because you don't want to be branded as that. But now all of a sudden, how do I reconcile the fact that if I don't go anywhere, I might not get a raise? Like, how do you reconcile those two things? What kind of coaching and advice are you giving, Brian?
I love this question, actually. So one interesting thing about Generation Z is a lot of studies will show, I'm just going to make a pretty wide percentage here because I don't know the exact one, but between 40 to 70% of Gen Z in the workforce today is actively looking for other opportunities at the same time. And that's a big percentage and probably much larger than any other generation. When I speak to my friends, almost every single one of them are applying to jobs on LinkedIn, looking at other opportunities, even after starting 1 month into their job. Now, the reason I think for this is because, and I'm going to share a personal experience really quick. So right when I joined the workforce, right, I was working really hard. I was exceeding expectations. Everything was going great. I was going to get a promotion. And boom, I was let go with over 12,000 employees from my job without no email, no phone call. I just opened my computer, didn't have access, didn't know for 2 hours later that I was impacted by a mass layoff in tech. Now, when this happened, it wasn't just me. It was people who had worked for that company for 30 years, who had given their lives, and with not even a phone call from their manager, they just no longer had a job. And that right there is how I entered the workforce. And that is a lot of what Gen Z saw. So this idea of company loyalty, just blindly to stay there, to sacrifice a paycheck, to sacrifice career growth, we don't look at it the same way. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't retain Gen Z folks in the workplace. You just got to lean in a little bit of a different direction, get them connected on the purpose. Why are they here? What's their value? How are they going to impact the broader organization? And how do they bring meaning to both the company and how is that company bringing meaning to them in the day-to-day?
I love it. Thanks so much, Brian. I'm gonna give you the last word on that one. So let me ask Rachel to bring us back to the slides. I want to share with you a couple of different things here. One is how you're going to be able to get in touch with our guests. So we have, we'll include this in the follow-up notes as well. So you can connect with them on LinkedIn. It's the best place to get in touch with any of us. Definitely appreciate the follows. We're pretty active on LinkedIn as well, sharing tips whenever we can. That's a good example. And then the next slide, we've asked each of our guests to share some takeaways, some different tips and things they can look at. Oh, I apologize. I got it out of order here. We've got a tip sheet here. This is the session follow-up for us, which is called One for the Ages, the same title as the webinar. And in this one, I prepared for you a quick reference to the years and the values of the different generational cohorts, as well as 12 timeless tips for how you can have multi-generational success. So take that, consume it yourself, forward it to people that you care about in your organization, however it can be of value. I hope that you find it valuable. Let's go back to our guest promotions if we can for a second. Go back the other way, please. And we're going to talk about some things that we want to promote. So Brian is promoting the fact that he was on my Lead the People podcast. It was an amazing episode about how Gen Z is showing up at work. So I love that episode, Brian. I love it. And thanks for that. We're going to include that link for you if you want to check out that podcast appearance with Brian, where he has the floor, the limelight all to himself, sharing all about Gen Z. Courtney's requesting that you and suggesting you subscribe to PI's newsletter, the PI Post. We include a lot of great resources in there for you. If you're not already a subscriber, please consider that. Link again in the follow-up notes. Dave's promoting the fact that he's got his Building Forward Now website. Lots of great resources, ways to connect with Dave, all the great work that he does. Thanks so much for sharing that resource. And for myself, I'm promoting the fact that we have our latest ebook, which is for HR leaders, How to Become Your CEO's Most Valuable Partner, MVP. Having some fun with that. 5 forces that are reshaping the workforce. So I hope you enjoy that asset. Certainly, we're moving along here. We've got our book giveaway as well. Brandy Babus. I hope I'm saying that right. B-A-B-U-S. Brandy, congratulations. I'm going to be sending you a copy of the book. Thanks for being here live, something that's an exclusive opportunity for you. So I will move us forward with the last one, which is join us next month. You're not going to want to miss the topic. This is called New Tools of the Management Trade. So how HR teams are equipping people leaders to succeed in the new world of work. Everything has changed, it seems, except the way we manage people. That needs to change too. So that'll be Wednesday, June 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Appreciate that very much. And thanks, of course, to our sponsor, the Predictive Index, to our global network of PI consultants and clients all over the world. Thank you to our panelists, Dave, Brian, Courtney. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I really appreciate you. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.